and welcome to Smashing It, working class artists on life, art, and making it happen. My name is Joelle Taylor, and I'm a poet, author, and editor at Outspoken Press. I also founded the national youth slams of this country called Slambassadors through the Poetry Society, and I write books. My latest one was Songs My Enemy Taught Me. My newest collection is called Canto and Other Poems, out next year. Writing books has enabled me to travel the world. It's made poetry my passport, which as a working class, white, queer woman has not been a possibility before. But through writing books, I've been able to travel across the world and up and down this country, meeting all kinds of different people and exploring all kinds of different forms of poetry and considering the ethics of poetry. I'm also the co-curator and host of Outspoken Live. And like I just said, I've recently taken over a tenure of 1 year at Outspoken Press, during which time I am only publishing women. Most of those women are from marginalised communities. But as we go through some of the things that we're going to discuss in this talk stroke workshop, you'll see why I decided specifically to focus on women from marginalised groups. This session is going to be looking at some of the issues, some of the points raised within Smashing It. It's this book I'm talking about, edited by Sabrina Mahfouz. And this book is an anthology of writing from visual artists, from filmmakers, from theatre practitioners, from poets, from authors, some of whom are household names and some of whom are just quite well known within their profession, all of whom identify as working class, whatever that means. And we'll start to look at our terms in just a moment. But first, I want to begin the workshop with this statement. You cannot talk about poetry without first talking about class. So whatever we do through this workshop, please keep that in your mind. That's the position that I'm coming from. So let's discuss what we mean in the parameters of this workshop, within these precincts, what we mean about working class. So I've written two things I think are really pertinent to this. The first one is that you are raised without a sustained connection to culture. Culture, I mean, in the terms of books, theatre, ballet, opera, all those things are replaced with pubs, bars, gigs, social media even. So that's the first point I want to make. It's about not just access to arts, but growing up among it. So you grow knowing the language which you will try to write in later. The second definition of working class is financial constraint, which limit access to the arts. And there's all sorts of things to unpack there in terms of that ideology. But if you can't get to, if you only have a certain amount of money, you don't want to be weighing poetry against sugar, which is the sort of position that most of us as working class artists find our way in. That means we limit ourselves, our connection to other artists, we limit connection to possibilities within the work. So let's have a look at a couple of the statistics. Around a third of the UK, apparently, identify as working class. I find that to be a little conservative in estimate, but let's say a third of the UK are working class. Now let's look in terms of arts, what happens. Around 12.6% of those involved in publishing, so publishers, agents, writers, poets, around 12.6 are working class. Around 12.4 are involved in film, TV, and radio, or radio. And around 18.2% is music, performing, and visual arts. So let's just think about that for a second. When you see that the people who are gatekeeping are not coming from the same background, then of course their understanding of what narratives that working class voices can offer becomes quite limited. And then you look at the fact that that limitation kind of denies access to us. If you can't see yourself somewhere, you don't imagine yourself there. You have to first imagine yourself a writer before you can become one. So these are very sobering statistics, and those statistics get worse when you add intersections like race, sexuality, gender. Of course, it complicates it even further. So now what I'm going to do, I had a couple of contributions to Smashing It. And shout out to Sabrina Mahfouz, who's done so much for working class artists in the UK and continues to do. It's like whenever she opens a door, she puts her foot in it and she keeps it open for others. So shout out to you, Sabrina. This book's not just got all the sort of essays and validations. You'll find a very important bit at the back, which is about how you go forward, how you apply for funding, the practicalities of becoming an artist. But I'm going to read just a couple of statements from my essay, which is called Smashing the Class Ceiling. 1. There is a class ceiling, and shards of it are stuck in the back of your throat. It shattered the first time you wrote a poem, and your tongue broke along with it. Carry it in the bowl of your mouth like you would cradle your writing award. Bring it out at literary events. Your tongue no longer belongs to you. You speak a language that you sometimes don't understand. You have to imitate your own accent. So far have you travelled from your home. You carry your class with you wherever you go, tucked in beside the air mac in distilled water. It rattles when you walk too fast. 2. You are a writer with a limited vocabulary. When people talk about access to the arts, they are talking about you. Nod. Seem pleased. Join a panel where the subject is whether poetry should be accessible to people like you or not. Discuss whether what you're doing is poetry at all. Focus more on your performance. They're more comfortable when you wave your arms as a semaphore that nothing important, nothing fundamental has changed. When you're asked to speak at Oxbridge or one of the royal somethings of somewhere else, make sure you flatten your vowels into shovels. Dig out the foundations of the stage you are standing on. Each word you write from now on is a brick in a new kind of building, a factory. Invite people you like to come and work there. 3. Annually, there is an article published that declares what poetry is and how you are not writing it. You note that poetry does not seem to want to speak to its audience. It is a code, a secret society, a cabal of crows pecking at typewriter keys. You study the correct way to write poetry. It is another language. As soon as you learn it, they change the grammar. A poetry editor tells you that they like your poems, but they are too much like poems. You nod in agreement and spend the evening unlearning. Even this essay is written in a foreign language. 4. As a working class woman writer, you cannot depend on outside access to the arts or support in becoming artists. You cannot assume access to the rest of your lives. We measure our dreams against the weight of sugar. Learn to depend on yourself and create spaces which you might think of as home. Make space for everyone like you. Collectivism is the antidote to cultural fascism. Teach, mentor, become. And we'll return to this essay a little bit at the back of the book. So I'd like to talk a little bit more now about the spoken word movement within the UK. As I mentioned earlier, I founded the UK National Youth Slam Ambassadors through the Poetry Society in 2001 and remained its artistic director and national coach until 2018. Now, the project, I developed it to be aimed at uncovering marginalised narratives, reclaiming voices, and providing access to platforms where the work might be disseminated, which was often the stage. I can't describe to you the alchemy of those early slams, how we got kids from all across London to begin with, all of them from the ends, from the marginalised communities, coming together in places like City Hall and meeting for the first time. And you must remember, of course, during that time, you must remember the importance of postcode wars. And what we were doing was working across postcodes, and we were valuing the voices of the unwritten. Slam poetry, much maligned as it is now, was the access point for many of the poets that you probably read today, many of the prize winning poets. The very first winner of Slambassadors was Anthony Anaxaguru, who you might know from his latest work, After the Formalities. Kayo Chingonyi was a founder member of Slambassadors as well, as was Jay Bernard, Chris Preddy, OBE. So these are people who found their way, they found their voices, and they found their community. And this is the thing I really, really want to highlight about the spoken word arena. It isn't just about what is being said on the stage or about how it is being said. It's about the audience. It's about the connection, the dynamic between audience and performer, and the dynamic between audience and audience. In other words, when we're all in one space together, alchemy, revolution, change. Over the last decade in particular, spoken word has seen a huge surge in popularity. You've seen the adverts, you've seen people filling out huge spaces, you've seen the national and international tours. And events themselves, so the poetry club nights, which are our bread and butter, have proliferated. They have bred to the point where I think there's probably a spoken word club in every city, if not towns as well. And some of these events nights, some of these clubs have become kind of super clubs. And I would think Outspoken, which is the club I'm part of, is one of those super clubs. We're now resident artists at the Purcell Rooms. The South Bank Centre's quite a leap from our early beginnings. There's also clubs like Bang Said the Gun, who do phenomenal events across the country. There is a firm of poets. I'm not sure they're still together, but that was an incredible gathering of poets that really influenced the way we thought about contemporary spoken word. There's Chill Pill, there's Raise the Bar. And all of these clubs, one of the interesting things we began to do is not just give you a night out, not just showcase new voices, because remember, the open mic is kind of central to a lot of nights. And we'll talk about open mic in a minute. We didn't just set up nights now. We've become these kind of underground literary development organizations. So we often run series of workshops with the nights that people attend can learn what the headliner, how did the headliner write that, will come along to the workshop or the masterclass. They're also doing things like mentoring schemes where you can, click onto a poet for an hour over Zoom and get some really close reading of your work and some really forensic editing work. They're also doing residentials. Raise the Bar, I think, were the first club to do that, and they didn't raise anything. They created a residential in the southwest, which is a huge success as well. And then there's places like Nymphs and Thugs, and they are a record label. They're also a kind of tour agency. They also hold workshops. So you can see this incredibly vibrant culture, and all of it comes from working class roots, whether you are white working class, black working class, Asian working class, female or woman, whatever your gender, it's that moment. Working class sense of community, being in the space with people. Spoken word is interactive. It responds in a way that the page cannot respond to the reader. So slam was a huge success, as I said, with talking about Slambassadors, but there are also famous adult slams. I would think Farrago Slam was the very first in the UK, and that is still running and successful. And Hammer and Tongue, who have become kind of more a sort of, I'm going to call them Starbucks Slam, but they'll kill me. What I mean is that they have events in lots of different regions, so it's a more egalitarian way of running the slam. You get a real sense of what's happening in spoken word across the country. And then, of course, there's the huge BBC Slam, where all the poets from all the slams try to get onto that bill to see who is the best. The clue is, of course, slam was never about who was the best poet. It's literally a device to get people who say they hate poetry into a space realizing they love it. In fact, we even changed the name from poetry to spoken word, because you can't talk about poetry without talking about class. So then we get to a point roughly 2011, maybe 2010, when there was another revolution. The clubs weren't just filling up with punters, ordinary people who wanted to to think more deeply, who wanted to think around corners. Not just that, but Burning Eye Books was founded. Burning Eye Books instigated a revolution in publishing. They focused specifically, in fact, only on spoken word artists. And they began to publish the works of the better known spoken word artists, word for word, unedited, literally what the people said on stage. It's almost like buying the sleeve notes to an album. And many of us were gifted with publication by Burning Eye. I will always be grateful to them because they were my access point into publishing. But the minute you begin to see your words written on the page as a spoken word artist, you realize that there are things the page can do that your mouth can't, in the same way there's things your mouth can do that perhaps the page has difficulty with. And so this migration occurred, and we're in the midst of it right now, a bridge moment or a migration where we're all looking at the page. All those spoken word artists, those working class artists are thinking, how do I make this transition? How do I use this media to its greatest effect? And how do I do that and retain a sense of myself? If it's like learning a different language, how can I say it in my own voice? So this session is going to look at some of the techniques you can use. It's going to try to encourage you to retain the sense of yourself whilst looking at both the page and the stage as what they are. Doors. They are freedoms. Explore them. So as we go through the workshop, first thing is forgive me if when I'm screen sharing nothing happens. That's because I'm 53 and I have really tried to get this right. Hopefully we will. First thing I always do is warm up, of course. The only way to write is to write. So what I want you to do is to reach for a book. Maybe it's a book of poetry, maybe it's a novel. You reach for any book at all. What have I got here? I've got Ocean Vuong's On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. This is quite a good one to use because he's such a lyrical writer that it would be difficult for me to find something that isn't great. What you have to do is randomly open it at any page, stick your finger in anywhere, and then see what line is chosen. So the line that's come up for me here is, it is Sunday, I am 10. And what you do is you write down that line, just pop it on your paper, whatever line you choose, or you use the one that I just spoke out, it is Sunday, I am 10. And then you give yourself 5 minutes of free writing. You have some rules around it. The major rule is don't stop writing. And avoid rhyme, please. Think of poetry visually if you can. So now I want you to pause this video for 5 minutes and you choose yourself a line and write. Okay, so you should have come back now to the second part. See what you've got written on that page. Is there anything on there that you think you could develop? One of the first things I always do is get rid of a first line anyway. And of course, it's not your line, so you can quite easily jettison it. What else is in the poem? Is there a line you can extract, put on a different piece of paper and begin a new piece? What is your subconscious telling you? You know, when you dig a garden, yeah, you have to make a real mess first. You've got to get in there and use the rotavator. You've got to get the soil unearthed. You've got to dig and see what's there before you can plant anything. And the whole purpose of warm-ups is digging. So just keep digging. The second exercise we're going to look at is around developing imagery. And this is an exercise designed to help you build up the landscape of the poem, to help develop texture and shade, to see the whole of the room, as it were. So the first thing I want you to do, and again, please pause after this. The first thing I want you to do is list 5 things you associate with being working class. For example, fast clothing, fast food, queuing, community, an accent. So take 5 minutes to write down these 5 things. Now we're going to go to a screen share. Hopefully, let's just get that up. Great. And good. So my screen should be sharing now. You've got your 5 elements, your 5 things: fast clothing, fast food, queuing, community, and accent. And now I want you to freely associate on each of those points. And as you can see here, I've written fast clothing, children sewing, blood, I don't know why, electricity, because I'm thinking of the time that I saw kids making clothes in Bangkok in the back streets in these little brightly lit basements, working like really, really, really fast. It was bright lights. So then I've got in my next section shade, and by that I mean, you know, the textures of the space. So I've put bright and the basement. It's a kind of oxymoron in a strange kind of way. It kind of contradicts itself. I've also got hum, because I like to try to introduce sounds as well. Like, what smells are in your poem? Is there a smell? Is it important to it? And in my next column, I've got feeling. And the feeling I get looking at these kids, or rather the feeling they generate for me, is one of is pensive, is thoughtfulness. They're very deeply into what they're doing, and these needles are going in and out of fabric like that. Another column I've given is animal, and obviously these are just things to play with. Animal I love to use because it kind of brings in another element. And when I think of these kids, I'm thinking of the movement of a needle through fabric rather than the kids when I think of this. And at first I thought dolphins, and I was like, that is so wrong for kids in a Bangkok basement. And I don't know why, but what came to me was kingfisher. And again, lots of these things, poetry can be very subconscious. In spoken word, we tend to be very, very literal. You don't need to be, because when we talk normally, we talk associatively. So, as you can see, I've been filling out my lovely list, and I've got my next one, fast food, and I've put down burgers, flipping, plastic bread. You know, the stories about burger bread living through the apocalypse. For the shade in that environment, I've got a fluorescent light, flat pack music, a feeling the people feel pacified for me in that environment, and the animal, some kind of roadside scavenger. This is what I'm seeing. So now what I need you to do, pause the video, give yourself a good 10 to 15 minutes to really go through your 5 points. Good. Now you should have started the video again, and what we're going to go to now is what I was able to do with this. I'm bringing back up the Zoom and finding the original. Wait a minute. Okay, so now we've come back. You've written down your 5 associations with working class. You've written in each of your columns, and so you've got some things to work with. And I'll just give you a quick example. I very quickly got together the beginnings of an idea of a poem just from that. This is how you use it. So you look down your columns and see if you can mix things together, if you can weave the words. So I've got electric children hum, sewing themselves to brightly lit basements, kingfishers of the slum. We flip our faces on burger stalls. Electric children hum, sewing themselves to brightly lit basements, kingfishers of the slum. We flip our faces on burger stalls. So you can see that you're already generating lots of different images, very visual ideas to follow that the audience, the reader, can follow through. So have a go yourself and see if you can mix those together. Give yourself a good 15 minutes to get one stanza together, as long as you like to write the whole poem. The next part of the workshop is going to look at poetry as cinema. I'm going to try and share my screen now to show you what I mean. For this section of the workshop, I want you to imagine that poetry is cinema, and your pen is a camera. And I want you to essentially create a storyboard. You can do this obviously with pen and paper, or you can do it just like this. So you make 6 even squares on an A4 piece of paper. And your challenge is this. You have to think of 6 scenes from your life or from your imagined life, because remember, lying is a very big part of creative writing. 6 scenes that you believe sum up your experience as a working class writer or a working class artist or a working class human being. And you're thinking really visually. So rather than just being an estate agent and describing something, you're going to take us into the scene. The reason I've done this layout as boxes is one, to remind you to be cinematic, to be very visual in your writing. Two, to remind you that each of these boxes create a narrative arc of some kind. And three, and this is very important, particularly for those of us who've primarily worked within the live poetry field, you cannot write outside the box. I know, what an irony. But here, I want us to limit the number of sentences and the number of words we can use to describe something as cinematically as possible. So an example is you might think of a scene where you felt, I don't know, you felt less than other people. So think of an environment you walked into, whether it's something to do with school uniform, for example, or whether it's something to do with not having enough money to pay for the things you want in a shop. Can you think of a specific moment? Think of all the scenes in your life and ones you've seen as well outside. Collect these scenes and pick 6 to put in these boxes. And once you've done that, you're going to arrange the boxes. And so what you end up creating, almost accidentally, is a very cinematic set of cantos. Now, a canto is, I think of it as very small poems, part of a larger poem. So for example, you might have Dante's Inferno. That's a good example of a series of poems that when put together create this very clear narrative arc. So you're writing very forensic scenes, little cantos. Take about 15 minutes to do that, and you can pause the video for that now. Now we're getting to the end of this workshop, and I wanted to look at spoken word. And I think it's a very important part of what we do, is to think about how spoken word is created. How do we generate it in a way that is powerful and effective? One of the best things about living in the 21st century is we've got access to a range of different resources on the internet now, especially things on YouTube. You can see a lot of different spoken word artists, live artists, page poets, the range of voices you can go and watch. One of the most successful kinds of spoken word is the victory poem, and it's also thought of as the slam poem. This is a poem you'll know because it rises. As you're listening to it, you want to stand up. If you're in the audience, it's created in a way that makes your heart beat faster, and that's to do with the form. It's a deliberate attempt to make the body respond to words. It's a rising poem, and it's called a victory poem. And I have to credit Anthony Naxaguru for that title, the victory poem, because at the end you want to be like, yes. A really good example of victory poems are Danez Smith. I think Dinosaurs in the Hood is a fantastic example, as is Dear White America, but there are a range of spoken word artists. People like Tony Walsh, Longfellow up in Manchester, they are masters of the form. Imagine if we had a formula for spoken word, what might it look like? So I wrote this little thing. So to begin with, you have a statement, just make a statement. And if we say use one of my very early poems for that, a statement would be, I am the last poet standing. So you start there, and you start at a low moment because you know the poem is going to rise. You follow that statement by 3 images, between 3 and 4 images. So those are the metaphors you'll use to deep dive into your subject. Then ask a question. Then make another statement in relation to that question. And the question, to go back to that for a minute, the question can be quite metaphorical. It doesn't all have to be plain speaking. You can be imagistic in your questions. You can be beautiful. And you follow that second statement with another 3 images, at which point you reach your epiphany, this sense of the moment where you, as the artist, have realized something that's integral to the poem. This is the point where the audience begins to really want to stand up. This is the point where they are with you, the point where spoken word is prayer, is worship, where the clubs are temples. It's in this moment. And it's happening physically as well as linguistically. So then you've got them to this point and you have your moment of resolution, the conclusion. So with a page poem, if you read them, the very best poems explore the possibility that the poem doesn't end on that page. Rachel Allen calls it walking off the page, walking off the cliff of the page. So you just let go. You don't conclude anything for anyone. You allow the reader, the poem to still be alive in the reader's head as they leave. In a spoken word club, you finish it for people. You tie it up in a lovely bow and you say, thank you very much. Good night. So what I want you to do now is to see if you can create a poem from those earlier boxes or from the earlier exercise around word association. See if you can look at the form of your poem to reflect this little formula. Good. So now we're going to get back to the final little bits, which I mean by that, the last things I have to say. As a spoken word artist, of course, when you're writing the piece, you are also on stage. You're sitting at your desk and the desk is in the middle of a huge theatre. Remember, if you're getting into spoken word, that performance isn't acting, it's remembering, it's real. It's something happening within that moment. You remember why and how and the conditions of writing the piece. So think about the form of the poem that we just discussed. You know you want it to rise, to become faster, to become louder, to become more certain. And so you start to explore things like, if your sentences are shorter, the piece becomes faster. I think Ali Smith has got a really good quote about this where she says, small like a bullet is small. So, you know, a short story is small like a bullet is small. A poem is small like a bullet is small. So in this moment, it's bang, 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 bang. Think about the texture of your delivery as well. Don't come in the room screaming, because you're going to be on that stage for about 20 minutes and people value their lives. Lead them somewhere. Remember where the oral tradition originates. Think about the liturgies and prayers. Think about your role in that moment on stage as a conduit, as a moment where you're connecting the audience to a more metaphysical life. To help you do that, the most important thing you can do, of course, is memorize your poem. Do you need to? Absolutely not. It's also ableist to suggest that everyone has to memorize their poem, because we all have different ways of being able to process that kind of information and retain it. If you are going to memorize your poem, one of the great techniques to use is to simply record it. We've got all sorts of devices now for doing that, from the iPhone onward, and you can listen to your gorgeous voice repeating the poem on headphones in pretty much the same way that you would do when you listen to a piece of music. If you find that you can't memorize it, you can still perform the hell out of a piece when you have it in book form in front of you. And I don't mean to say that you have to have it published, you have a notebook. I am against using the mobile phone to read from. And I know it's become a great device of accessibility for writers, but when you put that in a stage context, what the audience is doing is looking at your phone. The light is on, our eyes are drawn to it, your body, everything about you is pouring into this little square box. And your role as a performer is to move up and out, not in. So a book enables you to keep the space that you keep looking at quite big. Yeah. So explore doing that. The more you look at the audience, the greater the connection. The more you look at the audience, in some ways, the words can be absorbed by them much easier. It also enables you to work out how you're doing. If you're looking at the audience, and most spoken word artists will tell you this, that they measure what they're saying, the way they're saying it, according to how an audience responds. A page poet doesn't write a poem in response to, it's not interactive in the same way. I can look at an audience and know if I'm going too fast, if I'm too loud, if what I'm touching on is too much at this point. So I know that in my link between poems, I need to explore ideas around making them laugh, release the tension a little bit. So that's that. Remember, when you are performing a poem, you are the form of the poem. So mark down what the emotional journey of the poem is. Mark the main points. What is its narrative arc? How can your delivery enhance this? Poetry moves. Make sure you do too. So I'm going to conclude the second part of this workshop with the second part of my essay from Smashing It. And this is from my essay, Smashing the Glass Ceiling. 5. Over the years, you become aware that the reason why poetry establishments spend so much time mocking the simplicity, the formlessness of your work is that all they have is form, whereas you have content too. They will describe your narrative as confessional or histrionic, belittling the effect your words have on those who hear them. Keep writing. Formlessness is a form. Remember that you came before the written word. It's only because of mouths like yours that we understood how to translate the shape of words onto a page. 6. Poetry book sales can be dependent on reviews, particularly in the broadsheets or the specialist press, in order to sell copies. However, few poetry collections written by women are reviewed, and that number decreases still further when bearing in mind the intersections of class, sexuality, and race. To make matters worse, books written by women are seen as specialist interest in some indefinable way, and so review magazines will tend to seek out male reviewers to look at your work. Men are writers. Women are women writers. Do you see? Make your own critical communities, offering challenging but constructive feedback. Pull each other up. Do not critique spoken word with the same tools you would use to create academic poetry. 7. Don't forget, your lips are a printing press and you've been publishing works for years on watermarked, fine woven air. You stand in front of an audience and are home. You are the head of the class. Every time you pick up a pen, it is an act of courage. Every time you stand on a stage, it is an act of resistance. The only way to resist the monoliterary ideologies is to do it for yourself, to teach your hand to hold the pen correctly and remind your feet which way is forward. The stage is the TLS, the Guardian, and the London Review of Books combined. Revere it. Thank you so much for attending this session. Please get a copy of Smashing It, Working Class Artists on Life Art and Making It Happen, edited by Sabrina Mahfouz on C.I.C Books. And thank you so much for watching this workshop. Bye.